So, blending house. What's a blending house? Well, I made up a definition for my own preferences. So back in the day, we talked about independent bottlers, and I did a whole video on why independent bottlers matter. I told you about a website that I helped create with Adam and Nora from Lost Lantern, where we defined what we think independent bottlers are. It's called AmericanIndy.com, AmericanIndy.com. And the whole goal of that was to sort of define, here's our definition of independent bottlers. It's not barrel picks, it's not sourcing and white labeling. It's it's celebrating the original distillery. Well, in that original website, we also needed a category for what we were calling blenders. What we meant was people blending whiskeys from multiple distilleries. The problem is almost all big company distillers in Scotland, Ireland, and the US blend. All of them. So unless even your bourbon, if your bourbon doesn't say single barrel or single cask, then it's a blend of multiple barrels from that distillery. And someone there did that. And that person is a blender. So we were trying to figure out, what do we call the people and the businesses who are mixing together whiskeys from different distilleries to create their products, and being transparent and honest and disclosing the blends as much as they possibly can on what's in the bottle, to distinguish them from blenders who work inside of a distillery creating legacy products and brand products. And Adam, if I remember correctly, was the one who came up with the phrase blending house. And I was like, oh, that's brilliant. A blending house can separate it from a blender, right? And a distillery can be a blending house. But you can also have an independent person with their own brand line creating their own blends. And that can also be a blending house where they're not actually producing any part of what goes into that blend. And so we're trying to establish this because in Scotland and Ireland, blending is not as much of a dirty word as it is in America. In America, we don't have a good category for blended whiskey. And so when you see blended on a bottle, it usually means it's cheap, it's crappy, it's got vodka in it mixed with the whiskey. But that's changing. Very slowly, there's starting to be a movement in the last, I would say probably 6-7 years, of more and more people intentionally blending to create high-end products. A lot of them were influenced by people like Compass Box in Scotland, who I think are the absolute gold standard of a blending house, because not only do they blend just magical whiskey, but they also, as much as possible, disclose every single component broken down by percentage in the blend. When I first started blending at Crowded Barrel, the first blend we ever did, I worked with Jake Clements and Iron Root and Balcones and Andalusia, and we created the first Texas Whiskey Festival blend. And we just straight up went all in the style of Compass Box on the label. Here's the percentage of what products and in what age and all of that. That to me is a blending house. And I think it's a really important thing to highlight, and I'm going to finish a little bit with why. But first I want to talk about this for a couple of reasons. One, this is a relatively new distillery. This is a bottle that was gifted from Jack Stewart. He's a somm and one of the instructors in the Whiskey Sommelier program. And I had seen this bottle and had not really, I think he poured me a little bit at one point, but I hadn't really explored it. But Ardnamurchan? I can't exactly get it right. Ardnamurchan. Anyway, plenty of people will probably feel free to correct in the comments, and then you can get the actual pronunciation. But it's who owns this and who did this that I am also really excited about. This is some of the earliest releases of this distillery. They're up in the Western Highlands, and they're in between Isle of Mull, and actually for you it will look like this. If this is the West Coast, Isle of Mull's down here, Isle of Skye is up here. There's a little bit of a peninsula that sort of sticks out over here, technically connects to the mainland of the island, but the fastest way to get to it is actually a ferry. And that right there is where the distillery is. It's not that far from Oban. It's pretty even vertically with Talisker and Ledyig and Tobermory. And I have no grid for what they're doing other than this is 50% peated, 50% unpeated, and that's exciting to me. And they mix bourbon. Oh man, I can smell it already. They mix bourbon and sherry casks. And what I'm looking for is one of my favorite categories has become island distilleries or coastal distilleries like Oban because of just, I don't know why, because so many of them age their whiskeys like in way inland. So it's not like Oban's barrels are sitting on the ocean on a boat. But there's just something about the style that a lot of these distilleries, Talisker, Oban, Lejig, that has this sort of, I mean, crap, I would just say a sort of a briny, salty savoriness to it instead of a hefty, meaty, smoky savoriness to it. It's way more delicate than, Lafroig or Ardbeg. And I really love that, to still be able to get the smoke, but not, but also have delicate impact. Reminds me a little bit of the Bruichladdich. As a matter of fact, if someone poured this for me blind, I would probably guess this was an Islay, and it was a lightly peated Islay. Maybe I would say it was Talisker. It smells delicious. It's citrus, caramel, fruit, honey-covered fruit, and then this sort of ashy brine, toasted marshmallow, damp wood, a little bit musty, very sweet, soft. Oh, nice. Okay. Oh, hey. It starts soft, sweet, and kind of fruity, and then it immediately unrolls into ash. And then just when you thought it was only ash at the end, there's this sort of tangy, malty note that curls around and like catches you in the back right corner of your jaw and just goes, wing, I'm not done yet. It's citrusy, it's what's the word I'm looking for? Not sour, but like when you get that little, I can't think of it. Yeah, it's nice. It feels a little thin. This is 46.8. It feels a little bit thin, and I want to see it fill out a little bit more, which I think will probably happen as it gets older. But here's why I'm stoked on these guys. These guys are also Adelphi. Now, I don't know if you know Adelphi, but I can't really get my hands on it very easily here in the US. But Adelphi is sort of like a high-end independent bottler. And they sort of position themselves as like a luxury independent bottler. And their bottles are beautiful. And their independent bottle picks, I've had a couple. They're awesome. They've got a great palate. I'm gonna add just a dash of water to this. But that makes them a really great independent bottler. They're also blending, and not just anything. They're blending what they call a fusion series, and at least I think that's what it's called, fusion. Anyway, so I wrote this down so I wouldn't forget any of it, and I slid it down here. So they have a series called the Glover, which is a mix of Scotch and Japanese whiskey. They have one called the Kincardine, which is Indian Scotch, or Indian whiskey and Scotch. They have one called the Winter Queen, which is Dutch whiskey and Scotch blend. And they have the Brisbane, which is Australian whiskey and Scotch blend. And I think that's so cool that they are specifically creating lines that they blend with Scotch to create flavor profiles. And each one of those lines has multiple releases in it. And I just think that's the coolest thing. And that model right there of beautifully transparent independent bottling and beautifully transparent blending is exactly what I think the American market is headed towards and needs. I think the future of American whiskey right now is American single malt and blending. I think that's next. I think that's, and which is great because I love blending, and I'm not currently working in a distillery anymore. The desire to keep blending and do independent bottling might very well suck me back into the industry at some point. Once I feel like the Academy has really stabilized and gotten its legs and it can afford for me to sort of move my attention just a little bit. But I want to talk about and highlight anybody who's doing that. And if you go to the website, you're going to see a whole list of people we think are doing really amazing, interesting blends using American distilleries. And sometimes they're mixing it with their own stuff, and sometimes they're not, and sometimes they don't even have a DSP and they're working independently with other producers. But I think that's the wave of the future, and I hope that we all get the chance to experience more really great, transparent, and open blends. Cheers to you. I'm really glad you're here.